a list of the 5 most dangerous places to live in Boise, Idaho. From gang-related shootings, police officers being shot, and high concentrations of sex offenders, we're going to find out why these places are dangerous and take a look at some interesting maps, but we're also going to look at how to make sure you know what to look out for when moving here. There are really 2 stories when it comes to the safety here in Boise, and those are the statistics and then there's the personal stories. We're going to take a look at both of those today. The first area is one that I have some firsthand experience with. Some of you who watch my videos might have heard this story before, so leave a comment of what you think of it and if you can remember the suburb that this event happened in. But I had a coworker with an ATV in the back of his truck, parked 20 feet away from our office, which had big glass windows where we could see the truck from the front of the office if we were looking for it. Well, we got ready to go to lunch, and when we were leaving, we didn't see his truck, and this coworker happened to be a little disorganized. So we were giving him crap for forgetting where he parked his truck, thinking he just lost it. Well, it does turn out that it was stolen at around 11 a.m. right before we left for lunch, just at 20 feet from where we were. We called the cops, and after that we figured they may not make it much of a priority to go look for his truck, so we decided to take a look ourselves. Knowing the area, we went right to the worst part of town where we all knew as Boise locals had less than ideal activities going on. And then about 20 minutes later, we actually found the truck right in the neighborhood we thought it would be in. This is in downtown Nampa that it got stolen, and then it was the area surrounding it that we ended up finding the truck. And there have been a number of stories and experiences over the last 25 years I have seen happen out here. Growing up, I would see gang issues on the news, and as a kid that can get kind of scary. You hear about these gangs and it sounds real bad. Or I would hear about the drug bust, the sex trafficking, and all of this in this general area around downtown Nampa. Me and my wife looked at some homes in an area outside of downtown Nampa, but when we checked the homes, the sex offender concentration around that area was a lot higher than we would have liked, especially in preparation for when we have kids. We will go over the sex offender map and some other crime maps showing burglary and murder and car theft incidents all over the valley here towards the end. But overall, downtown Nampa has been known to be one of the least desirable places to live since I was a kid. Around downtown can be rough, but the area we went to find my coworker's truck is just east. It is on the other side of the railroad tracks, which I don't know why, but for some reason it's always the railroad tracks that are in the worst part of cities. Now, when it comes to the statistics, they tell the same story as some of these personal stories. Nampa as a whole, there are around 1,600 crimes per 100,000 people, which is around 500 more than the 1,100 per 100,000 Idaho has on average. And the next statistic that we're going to talk about, you're going to see a theme as we go through the course of this video, but I'm sure you can guess. But when you compare Nampa to the national average, it is still 30% lower for total crime, and then it's 5% lower than the national average for violent crime. So relative to the nation, it is still a very safe place. I say this all of the time when you compare Boise or any of these dangerous areas except one that we're going to talk about. It's always lower than the national average. Boise is an extremely safe place, but it is when you compare it to the other parts of Boise that it gets much less safe compared to some of the suburbs like Meridian. The next area I don't have as many personal experiences with, but I do remember as a kid hearing about similar stories of drugs and gangs. What I do remember is that we never visited this area. It was run down, there was not a ton to do, and most people just stayed in Meridian and Boise, especially back then. But over the last 10 years or so, Caldwell, Idaho has revitalized the downtown area a ton. They call it Indian Creek Plaza, and you have a number of new restaurants and apartments, and it is a place we will go and hang out every once in a while. There's some really awesome restaurants and events down there, but that is just the small downtown area. Around downtown is run down. This is an area where fix and flippers are buying up the 1900, 1950 homes and renovating them. And in some areas, they're not buying and renovating. It's still just pretty run down and industrial. And then in the northeast corner of downtown it can get a little bit more sketchy when you were driving through there. Now, the statistics actually show that it's worse than Nampa as a city of Caldwell, but a lot of that crime is concentrated around the downtown area. And so when you look at the statistics and you compare downtown Caldwell to downtown Nampa, it would really show that there's even a higher concentration in Caldwell and that it's actually maybe even a little bit worse. From personal experience and growing up here, I don't know that that's necessarily true, but Caldwell does have 1,700 crimes per 100,000 people compared to Idaho's 1,100. And this is where the overall crime is 25% lower than the national average. But the violent crime, which I think is probably a more important metric for a lot of you, is actually 5% higher than the national average, which isn't much, but it's still a little bit different than what we're used to seeing in the Boise area. That being said, it is localized in and around that downtown area in both Caldwell and Nampa. The area outside of downtown on the outskirts of both of these cities are much safer, and there are some amazing places to live. And as a real estate agent in Boise and a local, I make these videos to hopefully help you learn the good, but especially the bad, so that your move here is enjoyable and you find the right place to live. So give me a call or a text anytime. I would love to meet you and help you find the right home that will fit exactly who you are and make sure it is in the right area so you don't regret your move to Boise. We get people reaching out all the time, and I look forward to talking to you as well. Now, the next one is a little bit different. This is an area that I lived for about a year. And as a single man at the time, being young and kind of dumb, I didn't really think much of it. But now that I'm older and think back on it, there was some issues I definitely ran into. There was old homes next to mobile homes, next to nice new townhomes, and a lot of our stores out there and commercial properties were worn down. I knew of criminals and drug crimes in the area, and we rarely really spent time around where we lived. There was an unusual amount of fights and noises we could hear at night that we would get woken up to. And this was in West Boise, and when I lived there, it definitely felt less safe and was much less nice than the surrounding area. This is a place that when we go through some of these maps at the end, you will really see some of the hot spots, and it'll really give you a good visual on kind of what I'm talking about. But because this is a section of Boise, you can't really find too many useful statistics overall, like the ones we just went over earlier. But when we go through the maps, you will definitely see why I have this as one of the top 5 places to stay away from. And it is specific to the central part of West Boise. There's some outskirts, and I talk about this in other videos, where you do have some hidden gems, some really nice areas in there, but you will see that definitely at the end. Now, the next area is right next door, and it is not as centralized as others. If you drive through here, you will notice the rundown homes and areas, and a feeling that it just isn't the nicest area. Almost half of the murders in the last 5 years have been here, and you will see that when we walk through the maps. But the Boise Bench is an area that definitely has some safety concerns. Statistics here are the same story as West Boise, so I will keep this one short because you can see some of those statistics in the maps more clearly at the end. But this is an area where a lot of renters are, some higher rates of sex offenders. An area where a lot of people rent is generally going to be less safe than areas where a lot of people buy, and that is true here. Other than pockets that are really nice mid-century homes, or there's a couple of neighborhoods on the bench with $1 million plus, like really nice off the foothills looking over Boise. But you're going to see, as we look through the maps at the end, some of those areas that have a little bit higher pockets of these crime and things to watch out for. Many of you have probably heard of this next one. Since I was a kid, this has always been one of the most talked about areas when it comes to safety. Burglary, car theft, murder are all a bit higher here, and the same story with commercial space with the rundown homes is true as it was in West Boise or some of the parts of the bench. You have 2 areas in here that are safe and that are really some hidden gems, but a lot of it is much less safe, and the statistics really support that. There are 2,600 crimes for every 100,000 people compared to the 1,100 in Idaho, And overall crime is actually 14% higher than the national average, with violent crime being 89% higher than the national average. So substantially higher than anywhere else in Boise. Now, part of that is due to the low population of Garden City. So the statistics per 100,000 people might be a little bit skewed because you get a lot of people from downtown Boise, but it still shows why it's an area that you might want to stay away from. Now let's take a look at some maps. This will give you some good visuals on where the concentrations of crimes committed are and a visual of the sex offender maps. We have burglary, car thefts, car break-ins, robbery, and then murder. When we take a look at burglary, you can see that concentration of events in West Boise, the Bench, and Garden City. When we go to car break-ins, this is where the map gets a lot brighter. And remember, I told you where the concentration of crime was in West Boise. Well, it is along Fairview Road. You can see the line of car break-ins along that street. And car theft is the same story and is also right along Fairview. But for some reason on the Boise Bench, people just don't steal cars, I guess. And again, you can see this with robbery, all right along Fairview Road in West Boise. If we go over to Nampa and take a look at violent crime, it is pretty spread out. This is a map of violent crime. And if you look at this little cluster, this is the area that we actually found my coworker's truck that I was telling you about at the beginning of this video. Now, before we go to the murder map, I want to just quickly walk through the sex offender maps. If you want access to this search tool, just let me know. But we always use this when we're going to buy homes, who make sure that there's no sex offenders in the area, or at least a higher concentration than people might like, especially for those of you who have kids. When we look at the map of Boise, it can be a little hard to tell at first, but there is a much higher concentration along Fairview Road in West Boise and the Boise Bench. Garden City is a little bit misleading because when you click on a lot of those markers that you see, there's actually 4 or 5 or 6 all living in the same apartment complex or home, and they all just group it into one marking, which is very common. When you look at these, you'll see that they concentrate together and they'll live in the same areas. Now, looking at Caldwell, you see a similar trend where the area in and around downtown I talked about earlier have a higher concentration. And then, of course, that northeast corner, I specified where we found that car. Nampa is the same story with the areas I talked about in and around downtown. And then to show you a little contrast, here's a map of Meridian. And if you look at the little section of West Boise in this map, you can see a little bit of that stark contrast from West Boise to Meridian. Now, murder. I could only find a map for Ada County for this. And in 2024, there was 1 murder. If we go back to 2023, there have been 5 murders. And as you can see, 2 were in West Boise, 1 was in Garden City, and 1 was on the Boise Bench. So 3 of the 5 areas, or 3 of the 3 areas in Ada County that we talked about. Now, if we go back to 2020, there was 13 murders since 2020, and you can see that same trend with the majority of them being in West Boise, the Bench, and Garden City. Now, safety is important, but a lot of people are leaving Boise after moving here, and it isn't because of that safety concern. So check out this video here where I go over why people are choosing to leave Boise. This way you have all of the information you need to ensure you won't regret your move here, and you will pick the area of Boise that you will love. So thank you guys for watching, and I look forward to meeting you guys in person.